Let's just start a quick poll, Q&A, get that going. What did you love about growing up in the UK? Let's get that on the screen. What did you love about growing up in the UK? A poll. That side. There we go. Lovely job. Okay. Perfect. That's what we like. So I was just going through talking recently, and I started thinking about what it was that made me love the UK when I grew up, like as growing up. Obviously, I suppose it's going to be sort of the same for anyone growing up anywhere in any country. Um, but it started making me think about like different movies and what we did when we were kids, like whether we played out and things like that. But the first sort of thought that came to my mind was The Great Escape. I don't know if anyone's out there seen the movie The Great Escape, but it's one of those where they basically World War II POWs from America, England, all the Allies countries, the worst who have keep breaking out of their other places, end up getting sent to a POW camp, and then they end up creating different ways that they try and escape from there as well, even though it's meant to be inescapable. Um, so, but it's just that kind of like that plucky British like cheekiness, like always made me always liked it. And then I don't know why it kind of became like a Christmas film to me. Like I was always like, I think it's when it's cold out and you can just sort of sit there and watch it. But because of that, also watch things like The Battle of Britain, which was again another good movie. It sort of showed the hardships and the difficulties of fighting the war in World War II, and the challenges that the RAF pilots and everyone would have been facing to try and keep Germany from invading. But then again, there's like loads of other sort of World War II movies and stories and documentaries and everything else that you'd see. I think there's also a whole bunch of sort of World War One ones as well. But I think the idea of World War Two, that kind of good against evil, like in the sense that you had the Nazis, like that they're trying to defeat, um, standing up against them in spite of difficult times, was a pretty particularly like interesting thing. Like always kind of interested me as a kid, and that kind of also helped to sort of spark an interest in history. I remember always sort of liking castles and things like that. And anytime you sort of go and visit places and seeing that those old buildings, like the really old ones, and you sort of think like, I wonder how long that's been there, and hundreds and hundreds of years, like they could have stood there for until that point, and what's happened in them up until then. Don't know if anyone ever used to watch Time Team. That was a particularly fun one. Basically, a bunch of archaeologists go around digging up different sites, trying to figure out what's happened in those different places. The the I think they had some good episodes, but a lot of them they don't find too much. But then on some of the other ones, they get a bit better location, history, and different things come up. But again, that kind of always sparked that curiosity of like, anytime you dig in a hole, just you never know what you might end up finding. I remember being a kid and going and wanting to get a metal detector and go and check the beaches just in case there's any treasure that had been forgotten over time, that are left behind on the beaches. But then again, like I think that growing up, going to church, it became, I think, part of just a routine for a lot of people. But it did instill a lot of good morals. I think most people I knew went to church growing up, but it kind of like just decreased over time. And then otherwise, British comedies, so things like Blackadder, that one. Right, Blackadder is just kind of one of those I think most British kids will have seen growing up from my age. Things like Porridge, Dad's Army, Only Fools and Horses, um, Porridge, like I said, Black Books, and then things like that. And then as I got older, there was things like the IT Crowd and Peep Show. But I think that growing up wise, things like Dad's Army, Only Fools and Horses, Blackadder were definitely ones that I remember. Bodger and Badger, if anyone remembers that as well. But so then you've got things like that village life, visiting, so sort of living out in the countryside, visiting cities. That just reminded me of another sort of war movie, which was Uncle Tom. No, something about that, something like that, something like Uncle Tom. Basically, it's where the refugees kids who are being evacuated, evacuee kids who are being evacuated from cities, end up going into the countryside and staying with Mr. Tom, maybe Mr. Tom. Who don't know? Who knows? But it's he basically, this kid who's been abused and not looked after in the city, ends up going out to the countryside and loves it, and seeing what the sort of the other side of England can be like, and it shows sort of the stark contrast between what it can be like growing up in a big city like London versus out in the countryside. And then, but yeah, like I was saying about so growing up in villages, visiting cities, and seeing life in different forms. So whether it's through the sort of city view and that sort of hustle and bustle, versus right down to the sort of farming and hunting and everything else, that sort of goes day to day with being more out in the countryside and having that bit more freedom. Then you've got travel as well. So I remember traveling with as a family, as when we're kids, going around England to different places, things like camping and doing stuff like that was kind of fun. But then going to explore those different places and seeing different things, and then eventually going abroad as well, as we got a little bit older, and being able to experience different places abroad, going to Spain, France, and things like that. I remember that was always quite an exciting time when we were kids. And then you've got things like kings, queens, castles, and battles. So I think that as a kid growing up, like in England, I think that sort of stuff always sort of fascinated me as well. Having that interest to sort of see what's happening, or think about what would have been happening back in the day. So growing out now, I'm a bit more growing up, seeing things like Vikings and stuff like that is sorry to make sure that's on. It's shows like that, and The Last Kingdom and everything like that is quite interesting and gives you quite a lot of fun insight to what life could have been like, especially during that sort of medieval period and Dark Ages period, where you got the Viking invaders and kings and queens sort of truly ruling the country, and the peasantry and everything else. And then obviously you got things like the myths, the legends, and the tales of things like King Arthur. Then obviously also places like Scotland, Ireland, Wales all have their own legends and myths, and then they've all got their own castles and palaces and things like that as well. So again, all sort of helps to lead to and encourage that sort of myth creation. I think that everyone growing up as a kid imagines that they probably live in a castle and wishes they could. If ever I get enough money, that's going to be something I'll be doing, getting a castle. Inventors and creators and scientists. I think that it's something that is inspiring for people growing up somewhere like this, knowing the people that have come before you have created and invented so many different things and found out so many different things, and just thinking about what you could potentially invent or create or discover. Excuse me. Also tends to be quite an exciting prospect or idea, to be able to get that sort of entrepreneurial, like just creative and inspired sort of pattern and heritage. Is quite a nice thing to think about. So like, to the point where even as a kid I would try and create inventions and think about different things. So I remember hearing about, like, in Germany, how you could get, or like in Europe somewhere, you get basically paid to recycle. And I thought that's a good idea. Instead of just having bottles or whatever, you could have a machine in your house where you can basically enter what you're going to recycle, weigh it, etc., and it'll print a label to a QR code, etc. And then when they collect it and scan it and log it at the other end, you'll get credited to your account for whatever it happens to be, rather than having to pick it all up and take it to a certain location or trade them in at bottle banks or whatever. And again, I thought I was a genius as a kid. How you, in my kid mind, you could even have a tube that shot it away and took it to a whole nother place. But yeah, otherwise, like, just the fact that, like, you think, like, how many inventions that Britain's put out into the world, and again, that's something that we're probably going to be doing a reaction to at some point, is what Britain's invented and how it's helped the world. The other sort of things. So yeah, so we'll be looking at that, doing a review of that, and then what was up to? Yeah, so inventors and scientists. So we'll be doing sort of like a review of and a reaction video for something like that. I might do some time team reactions if that's possible. I don't know with the copyright on those, if you're allowed to, if they're how old they are or not. But gonna give it a go. And then oh yeah, so again, banter with everyone showed inclusiveness, whereas I think nowadays a lot of jokes are taken the wrong way. A lot of jokes are considered like to be either racist, transphobic, homophobic, xenophobic, any kind of phobic, whatever it happens to be, and then you don't really get enough leeway or like banter back, like, if you know what I mean. Whereas before, it used to be like, "Oh, you're a this," and you just say back to your mate, "Well, you're a that." So I think things like that have changed a lot nowadays. But again, like, as a kid, you had things like safe streets, like, especially where I was from. Like, I feel like obviously there's always going to have been places that aren't as safe as others. But I remember when growing up and being able to sort of roam about on push bikes and go and meet friends in different places, and you'd make dens and have bases and stuff like that for you and your friends, and then you play all sorts of different games, and bike around everywhere when you'd all sort of know where to meet up. Differenceness and quirkiness was embraced. I feel like British quirkiness is a thing that people don't like, the eccentricities of British people. Like, so everywhere is going to have quirky people, and you kind of just know that they're quirky and weird. Like, you just kind of get on with it. But at the same time, you never were forced to pretend that it wasn't weird. You just kind of like, everyone knows it is, like, sort of thing. Patriotism used to be fine. I think that everyone used to be, I don't know, maybe I was wrong, but I thought everyone used to be a lot more patriotic than they are nowadays. I feel like over the last like 30 years that people have gotten less and less like patriotic and less willing to say that they like the UK. And I feel like that since Tony Blair sort of era, with like the Iraq War and everything like that, it's just kind of demoralized people, or people have been more and more demoralized over the years and convinced that that makes the British people bad. And then other parts of like the history and things like that have been co-opted and used to convince people that that makes people today bad. And I think that history happened, and it's a case of like, we don't need to judge the people living today for things that their ancestors might have done or have done. But at the same time, I think that it's more weird not liking the country you live in than liking it, if that makes sense. But yeah, and everyone loves dogs, so that's always a fun one. Let's get a quick. But yeah, everyone loves dogs. Everyone in the UK, or at least used to, get a lot more cat lovers nowadays. Not that I'm against them, but I just prefer a dog. And sports for everyone. So I think that sort of no matter what sport you're into, there was something for everyone. Whether it was football, rugby, cricket, tennis, chess, whatever it happened to be. Whereas I think nowadays a lot of them have been sort of like adapted to make it more inclusive for everyone, rather than saying, well, that's not your sport. Like, it's now been made to be fairer rather than better. Man, coal fire, coal fires. Yeah, I remember having a coal fire when we were younger, rather than having to pay for these ridiculous gas bills and trying to get down to net zero. I remember us having an actual coal fireplace. I think that was so much better, so much warmer and nicer, and you learn how to build a fire. Who doesn't love that? Who doesn't love being able to just burn some wood and some coal and heat up the house? On that note, things like having an allotment, a veg patch, being able to garden and be self-sufficient and actually do stuff for yourself, I think has gone out of the window. I think that a lot of people just wouldn't even know where to begin with stuff like that. Whereas, and don't get me wrong, I think a lot of people probably do still know, but they, like, the amount of people who don't even know where meat comes from, or think they just assume it comes from the supermarket. They package it and send it out. I think that gets a bit worrying. I think that people's willingness and instinct to jump onto things like the vegan diet and stuff like that is very worrying and concerning. I think that there shouldn't be this like push to make people do it. Vegans, vegetarians, etc. You should do it if you want to, if you really feel like you have to. But for me, I find that the people that go onto those diets end up becoming a lot more like nutrient deficient in other things. I think it's because they're limiting their diets rather than sort of having a broad and varied diet. So if that would be my advice to anyone, is you don't necessarily need to go vegan or vegetarian, but just eat more vegetables. Try and eat less crap. Just eat more overall healthy. Because I think that most people think it's an all or nothing thing, when they could just, go in the middle. Got baking and cooking after that as well. So like a lot of people don't know how to cook, like I was saying, and I think it's something that is just a helpful skill, being able to actually make stuff. Excuse me. Being actually able to make stuff, cook stuff, and do stuff for yourself. Um, well, it just makes it a lot more affordable, a lot more. I think with today's cost of living crisis as well, people are going to be much more likely to be going up to that sort of thing, going on to that sort of thing and enjoying, because things are just getting more and more expensive as things go on, that it's unsustainable. And I think that having the option to make something, whether it be flapjacks, cakes, whatever, is better than not, or having to choose between that and something else. I've got DIY building stuff, so Lego, Meccano, and all those kind of toys, and then excuse me, that led me to wanting my own tool set as a kid. And I know most people probably aren't thinking, like, oh, I didn't do that. But that was something I remember asking for, and I ended up getting a tool belt with a hammer and a saw and nails and all sorts of stuff, and being able to do my own mini DIY projects with whatever I could think of. Then camping and exploring, again, just that sort of being outdoors, having fun, learning new skills, new things, doing new stuff, and outdoor games and biking. So even, like I said before about building dens, excuse me, outdoor games, building dens, things like that, having that opportunity to go and have fun with your friends, was just really a lot easier and a lot more accessible to people back then. I think the political correctness and the death thereof. I remember growing up and hearing about political correctness, and I remember a lot of people saying, "Yeah, fuck that," and deciding that they didn't want to basically go along with something like that. And I think that is basically what's finally nearly happening with today's new woke sort of agenda and stuff like that. But that brings me on to emos and goths. I feel like emos and goths used to just want attention most of the time. I mean, you might get like one or two who's actually genuinely serious about it, but I think that they are far and few between. And most likely, that is probably a lot of what the LGBTQ plus AIIP movement today is about. And whilst I'm sure that there is some genuine situations, I think at a young age, very young age, they don't need to be pushed into any of it. They just need to sort of be left to grow up as they are, as intended, as they're meant to. And then when they get older, they can sort of look into stuff that they actually are interested in. But in the meantime, I don't think they should be. And then I do worry about people like teens and stuff like that going in that direction and pushing so hard to convince people to accept what they're saying and doing and feeling, etc., as being valid and everything else, that then they'll struggle to be able to necessarily take that back if they decide that they are wrong about something. So, like I was saying about with the goths and emos, putting on nail polish and face and eyeliner and whatever else, it's a lot easier, and dyeing your hair black or whatever, it's a lot easier to fix than it is if you have been taking gender medication, or had gender reassignment surgeries and things like that, where it's going to have a much longer lasting effect and on people's bodies. Like imagine being a woman having your breast cut off, and then 10 years, 20 years down the line, you realise that it might have been a mistake, or being a man and having your cut off, and then 10 years down the line, oh, it might have been a mistake. Yeah, you can make serious mistakes. But yeah, then I always remember November 5th and Guy Fawkes Night as well. I don't know why, I think it's the fireworks, the bonfire, always going home afterwards, having hot chocolate and biscuits and things like that. Always a nice one. But then, and then Easter and Christmas again. Like, I remember being a kid and having Christmas nativity plays, which they just don't do anymore. They just have winter play, which is normally nothing to do with Christmas. So, a bit disappointing. And then summer holidays, again, making dens with friends, cycling about, going on holidays, doing all sorts of things really, and just enjoying ourselves. But that was just a few of my thoughts on what made being a kid in Britain great. If you've got any thoughts, any ideas, or any suggestions you wanted to add to the list, or things that you think of you made great growing up in Britain for you, let me know. Add it in the comments.